this week on Days of Our Mercedes. The Silver Arrows are coming off another solid weekend with some solid runs in Saudi Arabia, despite George Russell not getting the podium finish after Fernando Alonso threw some dirt at the FIA when he called out the FIA for their favoritism for Lewis Hamilton, which meant that Russell ended up with a 4th place finish. But despite that though, they got solid enough run and got some points and took advantage of Lance Stroll's misfortunes with Aston Martin and Jeddah to move up to 2nd in the Constructors' Championship behind the Red Bulls. But of course, heading into this weekend's festivities, Toto Wolff was asked about what the Mercedes has to do to catch Red Bull. And Toto Wolff went on and said that if they have to copy and skin Red Bull alive and make an exact replica of their car, they would do exactly that. Oh look, we might have another Spygate situation. Because this type of thing totally didn't happen in 2007 when Lewis Hamilton was with McLaren, when McLaren tried to copy and skin Ferrari alive. You wanna know what happened that year? McLaren got stripped of all their constructor points and got kicked off a 2nd for the Constructors' Championship and dropped down to last. So yeah, Toto, please do that. And how fitting that we may have another Spygate situation coming. And how fitting that this type of situation is happening with teams involving Lewis Hamilton. Of course, Lewis Hamilton was also in the spotlight on his own this week, as the leader of men would praise the Brazilian government for throwing a large fine at Nelson Piquet Sr. over Nelson Piquet calling Lewis Hamilton the N-word at Silverstone last year. Nah, oh well, just some useless shit, who cares? And of course, the FIA this week, they are cracking down on the crews climbing the catch fence to celebrate when their driver wins, saying they may give teams a time penalty if they do it again. Are they only doing this penalty because Mercedes isn't winning anymore? I bet you if it was Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, they wouldn't say a goddamn fucking thing about it. But just because it's Red Bull and Max Verstappen, oh no, that's a safety hazard. Throw the fucking book at him. Shove it into the incinerator. Yeah, like FIA, please tell me you favor Lewis Hamilton without telling me you favor Lewis Hamilton. And also, how fitting that we're getting this shit coming up, especially since this weekend's race in Melbourne, Australia. We will have the grand return of the Orange Army's Lord and Savior, Michael Massey. And of course, the bane of every Lewis Hamilton fan's existence. And yes, the sight of this picture of Michael Massey has caused every Lewis Hamilsexual's victim complex to completely intensify tenfold. Keep crying about Michael Massey. He's totally the reason why Lewis Hamilton locked his brakes up at Azerbaijan last year and cost himself a race win. He's also, keep crying about Massey too. He's also the reason you forced Verstappen off the track and turn 1 chicane and Monza, and forced you both out of the race. Keep playing the victim card. It's totally working for you. But of course, with all that out of the way, with Massey taking a different role in the FIA, the attention now shifts to Australia, to the land down under. So now we shift our attention to Melbourne, Australia, to the Albert Park Street Circuit. As of course for the Silver Arrows, they had a pretty rough ride at this race a year ago. But of course, with a better car than last year, they're hoping their chances are good. As Verstappen would end up with pole position, but both Russell and Hamilton would line up right behind the Red Bull of Verstappen, while Sergio Perez had a bad qualifying run. Which means if they can play their cards right, Mercedes could potentially catch Red Bull in the constructors and maybe catch up in the ground. Of course, right off the start of the race, we would have George Russell would beat Verstappen on the start, and Hamilton would also get by, which means on lap 1 we would have ourselves a Mercedes 1-2, with Russell taking the lead. And of course, also in this time span of lap 1, we would end up with a lap 1 safety car, as Charles Leclerc would get spun out and sent into the gravel pit, taking him out of the race. Because Ferrari fans are supposed to have 0 reasons to live anymore. But yeah. And everyone keeps pointing out that, Verstappen, he DNF'd at 2 of the first 3 races last year. And he went on to win the championship, but everyone's saying that could be Leclerc doing it too. Honestly, just stop there. That's honestly just straight copium that the Tifosi are trying to smoke with Leclerc right now. Let me just say one thing about Leclerc real quick. He is not Max Verstappen. He will never be Max Verstappen. And also, let me say one more thing about Ferrari real quick. Ferrari is not Red Bull. But of course, after the safety car restart, we would then get George Russell would then get a good lead off hit Lewis Hamilton, as Hamilton would keep Verstappen at bay in the early going. And then early in the race, we would then get pit stops with George Russell pitting for tires, but they would keep Hamilton out there to hold pace with Verstappen. But then Hamilton and Verstappen would catch a lucky break, as a few laps later, Alex Albon would get loose and go into the gravel pit and smash the wall hard, knocking gravel and debris everywhere on the track, which would force the FIA to red flag the race. And this red flag break is also a great break for Hamilton and Verstappen, as for both of them, Hamilton and Verstappen can change their tires under the red flag, because in the F1, you're allowed to change your tires under the red flag. So yeah, that red flag rule ended up nerfing George Russell. Russell potentially could have had a race win going, but got nerfed on strategy. And after eventually cleaning up the race, the track and everything, they would restart the race, and Lewis Hamilton, the leader of men, would go to the lead. As Hamilton fans are hoping that maybe this is the day that Lewis Hamilton finally ends his career-long winless streak. But of course, later on in the race, after Hamilton would hold off Verstappen for one charge, we would then have George Russell. His chances of winning this race went up in flames, as Russell's engine would expire and catch on fire, forcing Russell to retire from the race. Damn, Russell could have had a podium run going too. That's a tough break for him. Which would force a virtual safety car. And then after that, Verstappen, we would then get hit, would go to work, as Max Verstappen would eventually get by Lewis Hamilton. And Verstappen kills any hopes and dreams that Lewis Hamilton fans had left. And they might have just gave the homosexuals still reasons to live like Ferrari fans. And then Verstappen would continue to pull away throughout the race. Meanwhile, Sergio Perez would then find some speed, and Perez would climb his way into the top 10. And then once Verstappen got the lead, he would continue to cruise away, even pulling away from Hamilton with everyone running behind him. Because Verstappen has the fastest car in the grid, and he's the talented driver on the grid, so you know how this ends. Verstappen even going on and gained a bonus point for fastest lap of the race. Even though Red Bull told him not to and to let Sergio Perez have it, but Verstappen said, no, I need every point that counts toward the championship. In case something happened to him, even though the top two in the championship are Red Bull, Verstappen, and Perez. But hey, he isn't wrong. Every point does count toward the championship. Of course, we want to get late race drama until in the closing laps of the race, when Kevin Magnussen would smack the wall and lose a tire, which would force a second red flag break. And then once they clean the track up from all the debris there, we would then get, oh boy, a 2-lap shootout. Now everyone cries and says that FIA is doing their best NASCAR impersonation with a green-white checker. However, I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Yes, it's a 2-lap shootout, but technically, they're still within the race distance. So it's theoretically not a green-white checker, because green-white checker only applies when the race goes past its scheduled distance. But it's still within the scheduled distance, so it's technically on a technicality, not a green-white checker. But we would have 2 laps this time, and how fitting that we're getting this shootout with Michael Massey's return to the FIA. And by the way, this shootout here, this is what should have happened in Abu Dhabi in 2021, where both Hamilton and Verstappen restart the race on equal terms from a standing start. And in the end, Verstappen, like in 2021, Verstappen would get ahead of Hamilton and pull away. But then right behind Verstappen is when the chaos begins behind. It turns this race into a complete shit show. Because right behind him, we would then have Carlos Sainz would then dump a Fernando Alonso for third in the podium. And then right behind, even more chaos. We would then have Logan Sargent and Nick DeVries make contact and crash out, first seen a safety car. And then we get even more. When Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, the Alpine teammates, would then collide and smack the wall, which would then force a third red flag in this race. So wow, they really didn't even get to set to the end of Sector 1 and it already became a complete shit show. So then, during this third red flag break, FI then decide to do something very rare. They actually made the right call and decided to just end the fucking race where it was, with about one lap remaining, end the race a lap early, and decided to just put everyone out of their fucking miseries. And of course, Hamilton fans cried after saying, "Oh, why was it? They could have restarted the race with one to go." Oh, now you want the race to restart. Oh, now you do because you think you could have had a chance to beat Verstappen in a one-lap shootout. Keep crying all you want, Verstappen was winning this race regardless. And then initially, FIA decided the finishing order on where the field was at the moment the safety car was called. So that would mean that Carlos Sainz would initially go to third, and we would have a bunch of drivers get cycled up. Until Fernando Alonso pulled some dirt on the FIA again and saying, no, they should go back to where the field was at the last scoring loop, which was the start-finish line, since they never made it back to the line of Sector 1. And going where the field was, but at the start instead of where they were at the moment of yellow, and saying going to the moment of yellow, a moment of safety car was a stupid rule. And it probably called out some more Hamilton favoritism and all that shit, to where the FIA actually then changed it back to where Fernando Alonso would end up third on the points. And then Carlos Sainz would end up fourth. But Ferrari fans, you think you're in more pain from getting robbed from a podium? Think again, because hold up, we got a penalty. Beep. Because, oh yeah, the FIA takes aggressive driving pretty more serious than NASCAR. As the FIA would give Carlos Sainz a 5-second penalty for dumping Fernando Alonso on the restart, which means that since the penalty was decided by where the field was, since the scoring limits are by where the field was at the standing start, it means that Carlos Sainz goes to the last car on the lead lap, outside of the top 10. But yeah, an F1 race that had 3 red flags, an assload of retirements, a complete fucking shit show of a race. Yep, this seems like FIA's best NASCAR shit show impersonation. But despite all that, hey Verstappen fans, you still survived the chaos and were the last man standing, and you beat Lewis Hamilton fair and square and got the win. And this time, homosexuals don't have Massey to blame this time. Only themselves.
Yo, hey, yo, ho, super much, super much, yo, hey, yo, ho, super much, super much, yo, hey, yo, ho, super much, super much, yo, hey, yo, ho, super much,
So Max Verstappen now gets his second win of the season in the first 3 races. So yeah, 3 races, 3 top 2 finishes, as Verstappen now takes a 15-point championship lead over Sergio Perez, as Perez came back to finish 6th in the race, as Perez holds on to 2nd. So we are asked the question, would Perez end up becoming Nico Rosberg 2.0 or Valtteri Bottas 2.0? So far, he's chosen Valtteri Bottas 2.0. Ain't that a bitch? But Lewis Hamilton, the Silver Arrows finally get their first podium of the season, with Lewis Hamilton getting a 2nd place finish, right behind Verstappen again, as Lewis Hamilton, despite his best efforts, his winless streak continues on for another race. But Lewis Hamilton might be knocking on the door pretty soon to end that winless streak. And Fernando Alonso ends up with another podium. 3 races this year, 3 podiums for Fernando. as Fernando keeps pace with Lewis Hamilton to remain third in the Drivers' Championship. And of course, with Lance Stroll not doing too much though, and Hamilton finished second despite George Russell's engine expiring, Mercedes is still able to stay ahead of Aston Martin for second in the Constructors' Championship. But Red Bull continues to pull, but Red Bull pulls away with Perez keeping pace against some solid points for the team. So Verstappen gets the win, as yep, it's looking like this is going to be the part of the year where Verstappen was going to pull away in the championship again and dominate the race. So here's the question. How many races is it going to take for Verstappen to lock up the championship early? Is it going to be 4 races like last year, maybe 5, or maybe less than that? I think it's going to probably be around 4. I think it's going to be like last year where Verstappen locks up like 4 races early, maybe. Who knows? You know, it's going to be you never know with this type of shit, but, FYI though, this race was a complete fucking shit show. And how fitting with Massey returning. But Verstappen stands tall, and he remains the winner. And with Max Verstappen, this is his 80th career podium finish, as Verstappen has now tied Ayrton Senna with their 80 career podiums. And keep this in mind, Verstappen's only in his mid-20s, and he hasn't really reached his peak yet. So, and with the way Verstappen is, maybe Verstappen could make a run at Lewis Hamilton's 103 career wins. Now, whether Verstappen can catch that mark or not is yet to be seen. But Verstappen's got this champion. But Verstappen looks like it's his championship to lose this year. But for Lewis Hamilton, the Silver Arrows, can Lewis end his winless streak? Can Mercedes remain second in the Constructors' Championship? Can Lewis dethrone Alonso for third in the driver's standings? Tune in this season to find out. How the fuck did this sport come close to NASCAR in the ratings again?